"You people are absolutely useless. I don't know why they even bother hiring your kind for positions that require actual intelligence." The words hung in the air of the pristine marble lobby like poison, spoken by a man whose net worth could feed entire nations. Khalid Al Mansouri, heir to a petroleum empire worth $18 billion, stood in his perfectly tailored Armani suit, his cold eyes fixed on the young black woman behind the reception desk of Crawford International Law Firm. What he didn't know was that this moment of casual cruelty would cost him everything he had spent decades building, and the woman he was dismissing would be the architect of his complete destruction. Maya Washington had been working the front desk at Crawford International for exactly 3 months, but she had been preparing for this moment her entire life. At 26, she possessed a Harvard law degree, a master's in international business, and spoke 7 languages fluently. The receptionist position was temporary, a strategic placement that allowed her to gather intelligence on the firm's biggest clients while she prepared to launch her own practice. Her grandmother had cleaned offices in this very building 60 years ago, facing the same contempt and prejudice that now poured from Al Mansouri's lips. But Maya was not her grandmother. And this was not 60 years ago. Maya's path to this moment had begun in the crumbling public schools of Detroit, where teachers who looked like her were rare, and resources even rarer. Her mother, Sandra Washington, had worked as a night shift janitor at Ford Motor Company while attending community college during the day, determined to break the cycle of poverty that had trapped their family for generations. Maya had watched her mother fall asleep over textbooks at the kitchen table, watched her count pennies to buy school supplies, watched her swallow pride and prejudice from supervisors who treated her like she was invisible. But Sandra Washington had refused to let her daughter's dreams be limited by other people's expectations, and Maya had inherited that fierce determination along with her mother's brilliant mind. "Excuse me, sir, but I'll need you to sign in and wait for your appointment like every other client," Maya said calmly, her voice steady despite the rage building in her chest. She had dealt with entitled clients before, but something about Al Mansouri's casual dismissal triggered every defensive instinct she had developed growing up in Detroit, watching her mother work 3 jobs to keep their family afloat. Al Mansouri laughed, a sound devoid of any warmth or humanity. The laugh transported Maya back to her first day at Harvard Law School, when a professor had asked if she was sure she was in the right classroom, suggesting that perhaps she was looking for the janitorial training program. She remembered the faces of classmates who had questioned whether she belonged there, whether her acceptance was truly based on merit or simply diversity quotas. She had proven them wrong then, just as she was about to prove Al Mansouri wrong now, but with consequences that would reverberate far beyond any classroom. "Listen carefully, girl. I am here to sign a $3.4 billion deal with Theodore Crawford himself. I don't sign guest books, I don't wait in lobbies, and I certainly don't take instructions from the help." He leaned closer to the desk, his expensive cologne mixing with the stench of his arrogance. "Now call Crawford and tell him that Khalid Al Mansouri is here. And next time, they should station someone more appropriate at this desk. Someone who understands the caliber of clients this firm actually serves." Maya's fingers moved with practiced precision across her computer keyboard, but she wasn't calling Theodore Crawford. She was activating the recording system she had discreetly installed weeks ago, documenting every interaction for the extensive files she was building on the firm's most problematic clients. Her research into Al Mansouri had revealed a pattern of discrimination, worker exploitation, and business practices that bordered on criminal. She had been waiting for him to reveal his true nature publicly, and he was delivering beyond her wildest expectations. The research had consumed her nights and weekends for months. She had learned Arabic from her roommate at Harvard, a brilliant woman from Lebanon, who had taught her not just the language, but the cultural nuances that would allow her to understand the true meaning behind carefully coded conversations. Maya had used her legal training to parse through public filings, environmental reports, and worker safety documents across multiple jurisdictions. She had built a network of contacts in regulatory agencies, human rights organizations, and investigative journalism that spanned 3 continents. Every connection was carefully cultivated, every piece of evidence meticulously verified, every legal theory thoroughly researched. "Mr. Crawford is currently in a meeting, but I'd be happy to let him know you've arrived," Maya replied, her professional mask never slipping. She watched as Al Mansouri's face reddened with frustration, clearly unused to anyone failing to immediately cater to his demands. Behind him, other clients in the lobby had begun to take notice of the commotion, their phones discreetly recording what was quickly becoming a public spectacle. Among those watching was Dr. Elizabeth Hartwell, a civil rights attorney who specialized in environmental justice cases. Maya had arranged for Dr. Hartwell to be in the lobby at this exact time, knowing that having a respected legal expert witness the confrontation would add credibility to whatever unfolded. Also present was Marcus Chen, an investigative journalist from the Washington Post who had been working with Maya for weeks to prepare the story that would expose Al Mansouri's empire. Neither Al Mansouri nor Crawford knew that every word, every gesture, every moment of racist contempt was being documented by people who would ensure the story reached the widest possible audience. "Do you have any idea who you're dealing with?" Al Mansouri's voice rose, echoing through the marble space. "My family owns oil fields across 3 continents. We employ 500,000 people. I could buy this entire building with the money I spend on lunch." He gestured dismissively at Maya. "You probably make in a year what I spend on a single pair of shoes. So stop pretending you have any authority here, and do what you're told." What Al Mansouri didn't realize was that Maya had spent the last 3 months carefully documenting every aspect of his business empire, including the labor violations, environmental disasters, and financial irregularities that his family had covered up for generations. She had built relationships with investigative journalists, human rights activists, and regulatory officials across 4 countries. Her Harvard connections included classmates now working at the Securities and Exchange Commission, the Environmental Protection Agency, and the International Criminal Court. She had been building a case against the Al Mansouri empire that would make the $3.4 billion deal he was here to sign seem like pocket change compared to the penalties and sanctions he would soon face. The evidence she had compiled was staggering in its scope and devastating in its implications. Internal company documents revealed systematic wage theft affecting thousands of workers in developing countries, with Al Mansouri executives joking in emails about how local workers would accept any conditions because they had no other options. Environmental reports showed deliberate contamination of water supplies in Nigeria, Venezuela, and Iraq, with company scientists ordered to falsify data to hide the extent of the damage. Financial records revealed a complex web of shell companies designed to hide profits from taxation while shifting liability for environmental disasters to subsidiaries that would be dissolved when lawsuits emerged. Theodore Crawford emerged from the elevator just as Al Mansouri was reaching the peak of his tirade. Crawford was a distinguished man in his 60s, silver-haired and immaculately dressed, who had built his reputation on representing the world's wealthiest clients while maintaining an image of respectability and discretion. He had been looking forward to the Al Mansouri deal for months, viewing it as the crown jewel that would cement his firm's position as the premier legal representation for international oil interests. Crawford's relationship with the Al Mansouri family went back 15 years, beginning when he had helped them structure their first major acquisition in the United States. Over the years, his firm had provided legal cover for increasingly questionable practices, from environmental violations to worker safety issues to tax avoidance schemes that bordered on fraud. Maya had documentation showing that Crawford was not merely a passive attorney collecting fees, but an active participant in designing the legal structures that allowed Al Mansouri's crimes to continue unchecked. "Khalid, my friend, I see you've met our Miss Washington," Crawford said smoothly, extending his hand with practiced warmth. But Maya could see the concern in his eyes as he took in the scene, the other clients watching with interest, the tension crackling through the lobby like electricity. I do apologize for the wait. Shall we head up to the conference room? Theodore, we need to discuss your staffing choices, Al Mansouri said, his voice dripping with disdain. This girl clearly doesn't understand the level of service your premium clients expect. Perhaps you should consider hiring people who are more suitable for interacting with serious business professionals. Maya felt the familiar fire that had driven her through law school, through the countless interviews where she had been underestimated, through every moment when someone had looked at her and seen limitation instead of potential. But she also felt something else, the calm certainty of someone who held all the cards and was about to play them with devastating precision. The moment reminded her of her final oral argument at Harvard, when she had faced a panel of professors who had clearly expected her to crumble under pressure. Instead, she had delivered a presentation so thorough, so compelling, so masterfully constructed, that it had earned her the highest grade in the history of the course. The same preparation, the same attention to detail, the same refusal to be intimidated by power and privilege that had served her then would serve her now, but with stakes far higher than any grade. Mr. Al Mansouri, Maya said, her voice cutting through the lobby with crystal clarity. Before you head upstairs, there are a few things you should probably know about the woman you just dismissed as useless. She stood up slowly, her 5'9" frame commanding attention, as conversations throughout the lobby fell silent. First, I graduated summa cum laude from Harvard Law School, where I wrote my thesis on international petroleum law and the legal consequences of environmental crimes committed by multinational corporations. Crawford's face went pale as he began to sense where this was heading, but Al Mansouri simply smirked, clearly believing that Maya was just another ambitious employee trying to impress him with credentials that meant nothing in the real world of power and money. He had encountered dozens of young lawyers over the years, all eager to prove themselves, all ultimately willing to compromise their principles for the right price. Second, Maya continued, her voice growing stronger with each word, I speak Arabic fluently, which means I understood every word you said to your assistant on the phone 15 minutes ago about bribing EPA officials to overlook the contamination at your Louisiana refinery. The same contamination that has been poisoning the water supply of predominantly black communities for the past 8 years. The color drained from Al Mansouri's face as he realized the implications of Maya's revelation. The phone conversation she referenced had included detailed discussions of which officials could be bought, how much money would be required, and specific instructions for covering up test results that showed dangerous levels of benzene and other carcinogens in the local water supply. The communities affected were among the poorest in Louisiana, areas where residents lacked the resources to fight back against corporate pollution and had been systematically ignored by state environmental agencies. Third, Maya continued, her momentum building as she watched Al Mansouri's carefully constructed world begin to crumble. I've spent the last 3 months compiling evidence of your company's systematic wage theft, worker safety violations, and environmental crimes across your operations in Nigeria, Venezuela, and Iraq. Evidence that I've already shared with contacts at the International Criminal Court, the Securities and Exchange Commission, and investigative journalists at the Washington Post, The Guardian, and Al Jazeera. The evidence Maya had compiled included testimony from hundreds of workers who had been cheated out of wages, denied medical care for work-related injuries, and threatened with violence when they attempted to organize for better conditions. She had documentation of environmental disasters that had destroyed entire ecosystems, killing wildlife and contaminating agricultural land that local communities depended on for survival. The scope of Al Mansouri's crimes was breathtaking, affecting millions of people across multiple continents, all driven by an insatiable greed and complete disregard for human dignity. Al Mansouri's carefully constructed world of privilege and immunity was crumbling around him with each revelation. But Maya saved the most devastating blow for last. She reached into her desk drawer and pulled out a thick manila folder, placing it on the marble surface between them like a weapon. And fourth, the $3.4 billion deal you came here to sign today? The one that would give you controlling interest in Arctic drilling rights? That deal is based on geological surveys that your company falsified, environmental impact studies that were completely fabricated, and financial projections that constitute securities fraud on an international scale. All of which is documented in this folder, along with recorded conversations with the engineers and scientists. Your family threatened to keep them quiet. The folder contained more than just documents. It represented months of careful investigation, dangerous meetings with whistleblowers who risked their careers and safety to expose the truth, and painstaking legal analysis that had connected seemingly unrelated crimes across multiple jurisdictions. Maya had worked with forensic accountants to trace money flows, environmental scientists to understand the full scope of ecological damage, and security experts to protect the sources who had provided evidence at enormous personal risk. The lobby had become completely silent, the weight of Maya's revelations settling over everyone present like a suffocating blanket. Al Mansouri's face had gone from red to ash gray, his hands trembling as he reached for the folder. But Maya pulled it back, her eyes never leaving his. You said I was useless because I'm black. You assumed I was unintelligent because of my race. You treated me like I was beneath your notice because you've never faced consequences for your prejudice and cruelty. Maya's voice carried the power of generations of ancestors who had been dismissed, underestimated, and oppressed, but also the authority of someone who had transformed that pain into preparation and was about to deliver justice. But in the next hour, you're going to learn what happens when you underestimate the wrong person. Crawford finally found his voice, his legal instincts kicking in as he recognized the magnitude of the crisis unfolding in his lobby. Miss Washington, perhaps we should discuss this privately. I'm sure there's been some misunderstanding. Maya turned her attention to Crawford, and he stepped back involuntarily at the intensity in her eyes. There's no misunderstanding, Mr. Crawford. You've been representing a criminal organization for the past 5 years, taking millions in fees while helping them cover up environmental disasters that have killed hundreds of people and destroyed entire communities. The same communities that look like me, that you've never cared about because they couldn't afford your services. Her research into Crawford's firm had revealed a pattern of representing clients who systematically victimized communities of color, from chemical companies that deliberately located toxic facilities in black neighborhoods to mining corporations that displaced indigenous peoples from their ancestral lands. Crawford had built his fortune by providing legal cover for environmental racism, and Maya had the documentation to prove it. She picked up her desk phone and dialed a number from memory. Hello, Agent Martinez? This is Maya Washington. Yes, it's time. He's here now. She hung up and looked back at Al Mansouri, who was now visibly sweating despite the air conditioning. That was the FBI task force that's been building a RICO case against your organization. They'll be here in about 10 minutes. Agent Martinez and her team had been working with Maya for weeks, using the evidence she provided to build a comprehensive case that would dismantle the entire Al Mansouri criminal enterprise. The RICO charges would allow prosecutors to seize assets, freeze accounts, and hold executives personally liable for the actions of their subordinates. It was exactly the kind of systematic approach needed to take down an organization that had operated with impunity for decades. Al Mansouri finally found his voice, but it came out as a hoarse whisper. You can't prove any of this. My lawyers will destroy you. My family has connections at the highest levels of government. Maya smiled for the first time since the confrontation began, and it was a smile that contained decades of suppressed anger transformed into surgical precision. Your lawyers work for Theodore Crawford, and in about 5 minutes, he's going to be too busy saving his own practice to worry about you. As for your government connections, most of them are going to be distancing themselves very quickly once the story breaks. Which it will, in approximately 3 minutes, when the Washington Post publishes the article I helped them prepare. The government connections Al Mansouri referenced included senators who had received campaign contributions in exchange for blocking environmental regulations, EPA officials who had been promised lucrative consulting contracts after leaving government service, and State Department employees who had helped Al Mansouri secure drilling rights in countries with questionable human rights records. Maya had documentation of all these relationships, and the exposure of this corruption network would trigger investigations that would reach the highest levels of government. She pulled out her personal cell phone and showed Al Mansouri the screen. See this notification? That's the alert I set up to let me know when the story goes live online. The headline reads, Petroleum airs racist rant, exposes billion-dollar environmental crime conspiracy. The article includes audio recordings of your discriminatory comments from today, documentation of the falsified surveys, and testimonials from the engineers your family threatened. Your stock price has already dropped 12% in overseas trading. The market reaction was swift and devastating. Al Mansouri Industries stock was in free fall as investors realized the scope of the legal liability facing the company. Credit rating agencies were preparing to downgrade the company's bonds to junk status. Banks were calling in loans, and international partners were scrambling to distance themselves from the scandal. The $3.4 billion Arctic deal was just the beginning. The total financial impact would reach into the hundreds of billions as lawsuits, regulatory fines, and criminal penalties mounted. The elevator doors opened, and 3 people in suits stepped out, their badges clearly visible as they approached the reception desk. Agent Martinez, a woman in her 40s with graying hair and eyes that had seen too much corporate corruption, led the group directly to where Al Mansouri stood, frozen in shock. Khalid Al Mansouri, you're under arrest for conspiracy to commit securities fraud, environmental terrorism, and violations of the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act, Agent Martinez announced, producing handcuffs as her colleagues moved to flank the petroleum heir. You have the right to remain silent, though given what we've heard you've been saying today, that might be your best option. As the handcuffs clicked into place around Al Mansouri's wrists, Maya felt a satisfaction that went beyond personal vindication. This moment represented justice not just for her, but for every person who had been dismissed because of their race, for every community that had been poisoned while rich men counted profits, for every worker who had been cheated out of fair wages while executives bought their third vacation homes. The arrest was being broadcast live on social media, the videos already going viral as people around the world watched a masterclass in how preparation and principle could triumph over prejudice and power. The images of Al Mansouri in handcuffs would become iconic, representing a turning point in the fight against environmental racism and corporate impunity. Crawford was backing toward the elevator, his face pale as he realized the implications of his association with Al Mansouri. Miss Washington, I had no knowledge of any criminal activities. My firm operates within strict ethical guidelines, Maya laughed. And the sound carried no humor, only the bitter satisfaction of someone who had done her homework thoroughly. Mr. Crawford, I have recordings of you discussing strategies for hiding environmental violations from regulators. I have emails where you joke about bribing African officials. I have documentation of your firm's role in covering up worker deaths at Al Mansouri facilities. The FBI has copies of everything, and they'll be back for you before the week is over. The evidence against Crawford was equally damning. His firm had not merely provided legal services, but had actively participated in designing the criminal schemes that allowed Al Mansouri to operate with impunity. Maya had recordings of Crawford personally instructing subordinates to destroy documents, testimony from former employees about pressure to file false reports with regulatory agencies, and financial records showing payments to Crawford that were clearly bribes rather than legitimate legal fees. She stood up and walked around the desk, approaching Crawford with the confidence of someone who had just brought down a billion-dollar empire, with nothing but preparation, intelligence, and an unshakable commitment to justice. "You're going to want to call your own lawyers, Mr. Crawford, but not the ones who work for you here. You're going to need criminal defense attorneys, and you're going to need them fast." As Al Mansouri was led away in handcuffs, his empire already beginning to crumble around him, Maya returned to her desk and began packing her personal items. Her real work was just beginning. The $3.4 billion deal would never be signed, but the money that Al Mansouri would pay in fines, penalties, and victim compensation would fund environmental cleanup efforts and support for affected communities for decades to come. Her phone buzzed with messages from journalists wanting interviews, law firms offering partnerships, and civil rights organizations requesting her assistance with similar cases. But the message that meant the most came from her grandmother, who had somehow already heard about the confrontation through the community network that connected every proud black family in Detroit. "Baby girl, I saw the news. Your mama called crying happy tears. We always knew you were special. But today you showed the whole world what happens when you underestimate a Washington woman. Your grandfather would have been so proud. Love you, Grandmama." Maya smiled as she packed the last of her belongings, the weight of generations of struggle and triumph settling on her shoulders like a crown. In 1 hour, she had taken down a criminal empire, exposed decades of environmental crimes, and proven that intelligence, preparation, and moral courage could overcome any amount of inherited privilege and systemic prejudice. Al Mansouri had called her useless because she was black, assuming that her race made her inferior and insignificant. Instead, her identity had given her the perspective to see injustice clearly, the motivation to fight against it relentlessly, and the strength to stand firm when faced with the casual cruelty of those who believed themselves untouchable. The lobby slowly returned to normal as the FBI agents departed with their prisoner, but Maya knew that nothing would ever be the same. The story was already spreading across social media, the video recordings of Al Mansouri's racist tirade going viral as people around the world watched a masterclass in how preparation and principle could triumph over prejudice and power. Within hours, Al Mansouri's business empire would be frozen by court orders, his assets seized for victim compensation, and his family name forever associated with environmental crimes and racial discrimination. The $3.4 billion deal he had come to sign would be canceled. But the cost to his organization would be far greater as lawsuits, regulatory fines, and criminal penalties mounted into the tens of billions. Maya walked toward the elevator, her head held high, carrying with her the satisfaction of someone who had just changed the world, one prejudiced billionaire at a time. Behind her, the marble lobby gleamed as pristine as ever, but the balance of power had shifted permanently. No longer would wealth and privilege provide immunity from consequences, and no longer would anyone dare to dismiss a black woman as useless without facing the full weight of justice delivered with surgical precision. The transformation was complete. Maya Washington had entered the building that morning as a temporary receptionist gathering intelligence. She was leaving as the architect of one of the largest corporate justice victories in modern history. Her reputation as a formidable advocate for environmental and social justice established forever. The underestimated black woman had become the nightmare of every corrupt executive, the protector of every exploited community, and the proof that preparation, principle, and persistence could topple even the mightiest empire built on prejudice and greed.